c'est un plaisir d'être ici. Lisa says, I feel like Oprah on the stage. It's my great pleasure. C'est un réel plaisir d'avoir ce panel avec moi aujourd'hui. 4 fantastiques leaders qui vont partager des perspectives de différents angles sur l'établissement des cibles, le défi du jour. Mais le défi du jour, c'est pas juste de se donner des cibles, c'est de les atteindre. Donc, faire du progrès en bonne direction. Donc, with us today, on a Hugo Damour. Donc, Hugo qui est VP Communication, Affaires publiques et Sustainability chez Cascade. Cascade, c'est un leader dans le domaine depuis longtemps. Mais le monde change, Hugo, on va en parler. On a Bertrand Millot, qui est Head of Sustainability, Caisse de dépôt et de placement du Québec, Global Investment Leader since its inception. And Bertrand continues to lead the charge to bring us forward to new heights or better nature, better outcome for people and communities and planet. Charlotte Weston. Charlotte is the Chief Governance and Project Reporting Officer at the Sustainable Market Initiative. For the ones who would not be familiar with the Sustainable Market Initiative, it's an initiative of Prince Charles. It's one of the very few initiatives he kept as a king. So she has a group of over 180 CEOs, global CEOs, committed to sustainable growth that are really challenging each other to do more and sharing leading practices so we can move faster together. Lisa French, VP Sustainability Standards, Financial Reporting, and Assurance Standards Canada, a key player globally and locally to provide market participants with relevantly reporting, or as Jin Dong said this morning, a new language. We're all learning a new language. She's learning French, but we're all learning new reporting language. So without further ado, Hugo, je commence avec toi. Chez Cascade, là, c'est un sujet pour vous autres, faire du reporting sur ces enjeux-là. Vous le faisiez pas pour vos investisseurs, pas pour le marketing. Pour le marketing un peu, vous le faisiez d'abord et avant tout pour vos clients. Qu'est-ce qu'on va faire pour amener à nos clients un produit qui correspond aux besoins du jour? Donc, it's always been a way of living at Cascade, and you've historically chosen relevant metrics to report on that basis. In recent years, life is changing. You're seeing demands for investors, we're seeing demand from customers, and significant challenges now you have to manage your ESG score. So what have you seen where you're at in this journey at Cascade?
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. It is the Lemaire brother started operating facilities in Europe in the 1990s. The company started in 1964. They started operating in Europe in the 90s. And they imported something they found there that was called social report at the time. And they found it interesting. So they started reporting, with Cascade, started reporting on mostly on social and environmental matters. It was backward looking. Those were data and KPIs we were following and publishing on an annual basis. And we went on like that for many years until 2010, when we decided to adopt a more forward-looking approach. So having sustainability strategy, game plan, where we would actually fix some objectives and targets and aim for those targets. And then we started, it's really interesting because when the company started in 1964, we were among pioneers in recycling, among the very first to do so. And it's interesting when they tell the story today, they often say that they had to hide the recycled nature of their product at the time to be able to sell it. So at the time, they were manufacturing recycled paper in 1964, hiding it, and then all of a sudden, all of these things picked up, and we started caring not only about recycled fiber and natural resources, but about water consumption, about energy consumption, about greenhouse gas emission later. And we started reporting backward looking. Then after we started having objective game plan with targets and KPIs. And we've done that for quite some time with quite a lot of success. As of today, Cascade has lowered its carbon footprint by 50%. If you compare to a year of reference, 1990, we're 45% lower than the average of our industry. In terms of energy use, we use 2.3 time less energy than the average of our industry and 4.3 times less water than our industry. So we have a very good track record. But what's interesting is that for many years, it was a nice to have. It was something that our customers would look at. Not something that would drive business decision, but certainly something that we would try to push to our customers. And then all of a sudden, I would say starting in 2010, we changed our approach. We had more forward-looking approach. And I would say in the last 5 years, we've seen a huge shift, like a major shift. And our customers now, we don't need to push anymore. Now they're pulling on these things. And then they are in need of more data. I have people in my team. I have actually 2 to 3 people working in my team full-time, just providing data to customers now. These were things that were rarely happening before, but now customers really do pull on these data. Now what's interesting is the financial markets and regulatory markets now are looking at this, and they want data as well. So we've been producing data for about 25 years now. And now we have hired within the sustainability team our former audit director to strengthen our data and make sure that we get data now that are, I would say, financial grade data. So we run through our processes, make sure that they're seamless, make sure that we don't manipulate the information too much, make sure we have the good systems, that we have good data. And we're trying to build a data pipeline that is as strong as financial data. So that's what we're working on right now. But we've seen a complete shift. So from hiding the fact we were in recycle, from trying to push it to our customers because there could be some interest to it, and now people are really pulling on it. And I can maybe just give you, and conclude on this, an example. There's companies out there we tried to do business for a long time and we didn't succeed. Maple Leaf was one of these companies. We tried to do packaging for Maple Leaf for decades and it didn't work for different reasons. And about 5 years ago, they've decided as a protein company, they would be under pressure on a climate change world. So they've decided they decided wisely they would become the most sustainable protein company in the world. So they look at every aspect of their business and try to see how they could actually reduce their footprint. And when they came to packaging, they've decided to knock on our door and work with us. So taking these moves, reporting on these moves, having quality data has changed many things for us, and now it brings customer. Walmart is another example. Walmart is not necessarily perceived as a company that is really strong on sustainability, but they've been driving major change over the last few years. And they took an objective of reducing their carbon footprint by 1 gigaton. Now, when you manage stores, there's light bulbs at the ceilings, and there's a couple of things you can have impact on, but there's not many direct emission you can have impact on. So what they do is they work within their supply chain to reduce their greenhouse gas emission. And obviously, they like our product, they probably like our prices, but now they like us very much because we're highly committed on science-based target initiative targets. So we play within their game plan, which is to reduce their emission, including in scope 3. So they like us for one more reason now. So we've seen a lot of these things. Now we sign contract with companies that includes within contracts clauses about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So these are new things we've seen, I would say mostly in the last 5 years, but it shows how the world has changed and how it's impacting us.
And we talked as we prepared the challenge of setting science-based targets and net zero commitments for 2050, and how you feel about that, and how you're struggling between the pressure from your peers and your core values. You won't commit to stuff you don't know how you're going to get done. So can you say a few words on the debate you're having?
Yeah, for those who do not know, science-based target is a framework that was been built following the Paris Accord by United Nations, but other organizations as well. And when you subscribe to science-based target, these are really difficult targets to achieve. Just for you to understand, we've reduced our footprint by 50%, but for 2030 to be recognized and accepted as a science-based target company, we had to commit to an additional reduction of 38.7%, so over the next 10 years. So this is something really significant. So we've built a game plan. We've done some reverse engineering. We look at every project we have in the company. We build a roadmap. We evaluated at a high level how much it would cost, and we figured we could do it. So we actually committed to science-based target. And this is the first step, I would say, to reach carbon neutrality 2050. But we haven't committed yet to 2050. As a large emitter, it is challenging as manufacturers, as pragmatic people. We look at it, and frankly, there's no clear path for carbon neutrality. We know we can do better, we can reduce, but we haven't figured that path, and it probably relies on some technology that doesn't even exist yet. But it's interesting because we have, for example, a competitor that undertook a target which is about the same as our target. And then we were impressed when they came out with their game plan, and we looked at it, and it was slightly above 30% reduction. Ours was 38, but we were impressed. And then we looked at it in the fine prints. The reference year was 2000. So in SBTI, to have a science-based target, we were based on 2019 as our reference year. So basically, 2019, year zero was 100%, and then we had to reduce by 38 before 2030. They were not being science target. They were showcasing their game plan at more than 30% reduction, but the reference year was 2000. So basically, they were going 20 years back, to fix their target. So it's kind of frustrating. We've seen that as well. We've been invited to a business recruitment, and they wanted to share our journey in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. And at some point, they asked us, and they were not committed to carbon neutrality, 2050 carbon neutrality. And they told us they, as a group, took that commitment. So all the businesses within that group voted on that. They took that commitment. But at the same time, they showed us a poll. 75% of the businesses in the room didn't know what their footprint was and didn't know how to measure it. So it puts companies in a difficult position. We have decided to go down that way, to do it seriously, to make the effort, to put the money in everything. And there's all these, companies out there claiming things. It's good to be ambitious. Don't get me wrong here. I think it's important to comment, but it is also important to have an idea on how you're going to do it. So I think with more regulation coming on these things, it comes as a good thing for us. It comes as something that will help people differentiate who's really making an effort. It will bring clarity on that matter.
Bertrand, toi, tu as investi dans Cascade. La Caisse de dépôt a été là, un supporter de Cascade. Donc, chez la Caisse de dépôt, l'investissement responsable, c'est une façon d'être depuis le début aussi. C'est notre argent. Merci de ce que vous en faites. Mais tu travailles, dans le fond, sur comment moi, comme investisseur, j'intègre ces standards dans mes décisions d'investissement, dans mes décisions de garder, de ne pas garder certaines entreprises. Donc, comme investisseur, vous avez fait beaucoup pour l'inclusion, pour la planète, puis vous continuez. Comment vous incorporez les facteurs ESG dans vos décisions d'investissement? Particulièrement, on parle du climat, de la nature. Le climat, on est plus avancé. La nature, on est au début, puis on est tout en train d'apprendre en même temps. Là, quand vous regardez pour un investissement, quand vous décidez de le garder, quand vous faites des initiatives d'engagement avec les sociétés en portefeuille. Donc, comment ça se passe chez vous?
Merci Anne-Marie. Bonjour à toutes et tous et merci de m'avoir invité. Je dirais peut-être un petit peu de contexte. La Caisse, donc 402 milliards de dollars. On investit dans 6 classes d'actifs. On investit 85% de notre argent à l'interne. Et ça, c'est très important parce que ça nous donne beaucoup de leviers internes pour faire avancer l'agenda. Je dirais un point qui est très important pour nous. On a des politiques liées à la durabilité depuis 1994, mais avec une première politique de vote par procuration, et puis on sort de la période de vote par procuration en 2023 et c'est toujours excessivement d'actualité. Mais je dirais que pour nous, le rendement qu'on offre à nos déposants, le rendement optimal est intimement lié avec la performance durable du portefeuille. C'est une conviction dans cet ordre-là, rendement et durabilité. Mais c'est très, très important pour aligner un portefeuille comme on gère l'argent de 6 millions de Québécois, 48 fonds de pension et d'assurance, on a une vue très long terme, et à long terme, c'est des choses qui comptent, évidemment, de façon très, très importante. Je te dirais plusieurs points. Un premier levier qu'on prend, c'est d'essayer de faire des actions proactives. Et donc on a des cibles, et chacune de nos cibles sont déclinées sur chacune des classes d'actifs parce qu'elles ont des leviers qui leur sont propres. L'équipe d'infrastructure peut investir dans l'énergie renouvelable plus que l'équipe marché boursier parce qu'il y a beaucoup de renouvelables sur les marchés boursiers. Ivanhoe Cambridge, notre filiale immobilière, investit dans des bâtiments verts, etc., etc. Donc on fixe des cibles qui sont à la caisse, et puis je vais y revenir, qui ne sont pas en caisse, mais aussi qui sont déclinées sur chacune des équipes d'invest. Et en matière d'investissement proactif, donc on investit dans le vert. On est à 47 milliards de dollars d'actifs verts, on en avait 18 en 2017 et on vise 54 en 2025. Donc, on investit dans des éoliennes, dans du solaire, dans de l'hydrogène, dans des bâtiments verts, de la mobilité durable, etc. Et ça, c'est fait par un nombre de classes d'actifs. On investit aussi dans la nature par le biais d'une équipe de gestion des terres durables. Donc, on a commencé ça il y a quelques années et puis ça avance gentiment. Et puis, on a aussi des investissements pour transitionner des actifs qui sont très émetteurs. Donc, une enveloppe de transition où on investit dans des choses qui sont excessivement émettrices pour les rendre vertes sur la base de plans certifiés. Et ça, c'est très, très important. C'est que on est rigoureux à la caisse, vous le savez. Et donc, on fait certifier la trajectoire carbone des actifs dans lesquels on investit dans cette catégorie-là pour s'assurer qu'ils ont effectivement des plans de CAPEX et puis des intentions qui sont sérieuses et sur lesquelles on peut compter pour réduire leur intensité carbone ou leur empreinte carbone à moyen terme. Et donc, on a fait l'année dernière 3 investissements de cette nature qui vont effectivement réduire les émissions de carbone sur la planète. Donc ça, c'est un premier levier, c'est vraiment investir proactivement pour le climat, pour la nature. On a aussi un levier qui est très important, qui est l'engagement de notre portefeuille et des cibles de réduction pour le portefeuille de 60% d'ici 2030. On était sur une base de 2017 et on a un engagement évidemment net zéro 2050. C'est le gros du portefeuille, ça. C'est composé de grosses multinationales, de sociétés. On en a une partie qui sont déjà certifiées SBTI, donc 37 milliards de dollars. Mais tout le reste, il faut faire beaucoup d'engagements, pousser. On utilise notre vote actionnarial de plus en plus pour demander aux sociétés de faire les bonnes choses ou d'arrêter de faire des niaiseries, parce qu'on en voit encore beaucoup. On utilise aussi notre engagement. On a des conversations avec les conseils d'administration, avec la haute direction des entreprises. On les assiste aussi, ça fait partie de notre mandat, et en particulier au Québec, où on a des conversations avec des sociétés que vous connaissez tous, qui veulent savoir ce qu'on pense de leur plan, qu'on leur donne des commentaires, qu'on les aide sur certains aspects. Et donc ça, c'est un rôle qu'on assume très volontiers pour faire avancer la chose. On est aussi sorti de la production de pétrole parce que pour des raisons de gestion de risque, mais aussi d'alignement, transition énergétique et les courbes de la planète. Je parlais de risque. Une autre chose qu'on fait en climat, c'est les questions de risque physique, où tous nos actifs, donc le risque physique, c'est le risque de la météorologie future. Maintenant, on passe en revue tous nos actifs réels, c'est-à-dire infrastructures et immobilier, en gros, c'est à peu près ça, avec des outils qui permettent de voir quels seront les impacts des changements météorologiques futurs sur ces actifs-là. Et c'est très important de faire ça aujourd'hui, je dois dire, dans des questions de gestion du risque, mais aussi pour en parler aux sociétés en portefeuille, parce que nous, on est un propriétaire d'actifs, mais on ne les gère pas. Et donc, il faut absolument que la haute direction de ces entreprises-là soit au courant de ces enjeux-là, soit au courant de ce qu'on pense de ces affaires-là, pour qu'après, ils puissent agir dessus, prendre les mesures qui s'imposent. On a aussi des outils pour mesurer le risque de transition et avoir les bonnes conversations avec les entreprises, parce qu'il y a des modèles d'affaires qui vont devoir changer. Il y a des modèles d'affaires qui, eux, auront besoin d'évoluer, mais à la marge, il faut le savoir si on est un investisseur de long terme. Donc, on utilise tous ces outils-là, et puis on travaille actuellement sur les questions de trajectoire des entreprises pour avoir une meilleure idée de là où s'en va notre portefeuille. Et le point important qu'il faut se rappeler, c'est qu'il faut que ce soit un partenariat. La finance ne peut pas faire ça toute seule. Ce n'est pas nous qui faisons des émissions. Les entreprises opérantes, et puis on a eu l'exemple de Cascade tout à l'heure, ont un rôle clé à jouer, les gouvernements aussi, pour mettre un cadre législatif, un cadre réglementaire pour assurer que les choses avancent. Ces trois parties, gouvernement, les entreprises, la finance et la société civile, évidemment, ont besoin de parler pour faire avancer les choses. Et ça, c'est très important. Le dialogue est la clé de la solution. Merci.
Non, tu peux pousser pour faire disposer de certains actifs, radier certains actifs, mais les humains qui viennent avec, on ne voudrait pas que tu les fasses radier aussi. Hein? Donc, il faut travailler ensemble pour la transition, société civile, État et financement. Lisa, on your side, you've been at the forefront of disclosure standards locally, globally. You still are. You see the impact of mandatory disclosure on accounting professionals also. So what do you see as the greatest challenge ahead as we move into standard setting, forward-looking reporting, driving disclosure that enables investors to assess if we're on track or not? And the other piece, many players in the room still assume that ISSB is for public companies. So that might be a myth you want to debunk in the audience, for the audience.
Okay, I'm going to start in reverse order then. I'm going to start with the debunking. So when we're talking about sustainability disclosure, so broadly, I'll get to climate in a moment, but sustainability disclosure. So the intent of the ISSB's baseline standards is to inform the decisions of the investor community, right? So that financial capital, investment capital flows to those organizations that are really taking seriously key sustainability risks and opportunities and really integrating those risks and opportunities into their business model, into their strategy, into their risk management. So excuse me, in the first instance, broadly speaking, these sustainability standards are, as I say, capital markets focused. So smaller private SMEs may not be required to adhere to these standards or comply with these standards. I do change my answer, though, when we're talking climate. By virtue of Scope 3, larger companies will look up and down their value chain for emissions information, emissions data from their supply chain partners. And so for private and SMEs, basically for any non-listed or publicly accountable entity, they could be brought into the mix, not through mandatory pressure, but rather through supply chain pressure. So that's sort of the lay of the land in terms of the initial focus of the ISSB standards, recognizing that the reach can go further depending on what the topic is. As for challenge, I notice you said challenge. I'm going to stretch things a bit and say challenges, because we last year consulted the Canadian marketplace on IFRS S1 and S2. So S1 being general requirements for sustainability disclosure, and S2 focusing on climate disclosure in particular. And there were three issues that were recurrent, or concerns that kept bubbling to the surface. Chief among them was the issue of capacity, or capacity building. So again, let's return to private firms and SMEs in particular. They are terrified, for lack of a better word, about what is to come. And that's because they feel ill-equipped to be able to, devote the time, the resources, and the effort to truly understanding and applying IFRS S2, so the climate disclosure standard. And we've also seen and heard significant knowledge gaps when it comes to scenario analysis and scope 3 in particular among this segment of the market. And unfortunately, unlike their larger listed counterparts, they're challenged and sort of resource constrained and unable to look to consultants to help with a lot of that heavy lifting. And so I've mentioned consultants. So the consulting firms are also feeling sort of that squeeze to be able to recruit experienced talent and to build capacity internally. And then the same goes for the assurance side of the house as well. So kind of a cross-cutting theme, that capacity building concern, and by no means confined to Canada, right? So if we look in jurisdictions around the world, they're grappling with these same issues. And these issues become amplified when we're talking about developing countries. And the ISSB is well aware of those issues at a global scale. The second concern that gets raised is around the quality, the expected quality of the disclosures. And so businesses will probably grapple with establishing the internal infrastructure that they need to have in place in terms of controls and processes and whatnot to ensure that their information is assurable. I think businesses will also grapple with some of the qualitative aspects of sustainability-related disclosure. And if we look at a slightly different angle, yes, the International Audit and Assurance Standards Board is accelerating sort of the progress on its proposed sustainability assurance standard. We still need to recognize that most traditional assurance practitioners have little or no hands-on experience in this space. So these are some of the concerns that then the questions continue to swirl on quality. And then the final point that I'll make, and this is one that I actually feel a really close connection to, having spent 2 decades in this field, concerns the, I'm going to say, unrealistic expectations that we're placing on businesses with regard to complying with the standards and the level of quality that people are expecting, even before S1 and S2 are out of the gate. And so I think that some have described this as applying a traditional mentality or mindset to a very modern problem. And in doing that, we're really imposing this really high bar or high standard. And if we're not careful, sort of that quest for perfection might very well stall our efforts to focus on the big picture here and focus on dealing with the urgent climate crisis. So that's the third, and arguably, I would say, one of the most severe challenges as we look ahead.
It's interesting you say it this way, because when you talk to ISSB, we talk about proportionality, flexibility. When you talk to investors, they say, I want to see that you're moving in the right direction. But the accountants were used to do it right. So it's a mindset change for a profession to a certain extent that you can't, and it's forward-looking versus backward-looking. Charlotte, SMI. So you've been in that seat now, you're a corporation, because you had to change the structure given the new role. But it's amazing what you've been able to accomplish since its inception at the World Economic Forum in 2020. The amount of useful content for different players in the marketplace. Can you tell us a little bit more on what's the SMI all about? What's the value you're bringing to the businesses that are trying to move in the right direction, the investors that are trying to find investable projects. Tell us more about SMI and the types of initiatives you're leading. With.
Absolutely, I'd be delighted to. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And firstly, thank you to you, Anne-Marie, and thank you to the rest of the panelists and to the hosts this evening. I'm really delighted to be here and to share with you today. So the SMI, as you've mentioned, was started in 2020. It was an initiative that was started by His Majesty the King in his previous role as the Prince of Wales. And it really aims to convene the global private sector to accelerate the transition to a sustainable future. And within the network now, there are over 180 global companies, and they are divided into 20 task forces covering everything from asset manager, asset owners, private equity, financial services, all the way through to fashion, waste, water, agribusiness. And within those groups, they are looking at really what they can do to accelerate the transition, and also significantly, they're looking at how they can work together, looking at full value chains and cross-industry for what kind of changes needed to be implemented. The SMI has a mandate, which is the Terra Carta, and the Terra Carta sets out 10 clear articles with a goal of having it accomplished by 2030. And that goal and that mandate aims to give businesses really a guiding star to work towards. So I think that we've seen is really powerful in terms of setting the direction, setting the ambition. And also, as we've heard from some companies, even setting an ambition before it's regulated is really key. So some of the articles, for example, embedding sustainability throughout business models, is Article 1. Article 7 is around nature. We've also got articles around innovation and technology. So there's been some really exciting work across all of those sectors, and would really encourage anyone who's here today to have a look at the website. There's plenty of content there, plenty of interesting frameworks, action points that have come out of the SMI in the years that it's been formed and been working together.
There's people in the audience in the agribusiness. You've done with McCain Foods and others work on agri-food and global farm metrics. Can you share a little bit more just to illustrate the type of projects you're leading?
Yeah, so the SMI's agribusiness task force, which was previously led by Mars, has got some key industry players within that group. And they produced a white paper last year on regenerative farming and really making that a no-brainer for the farmer. So that was a great example of how when businesses work together, they can look at really key issues and try to really move those forward, but also make them quite practical and action-focused. Last year was, we did an impact report for the SMI, so we included that within the impact report. And this year, going into 2023, what we'll be looking at as the SMI is really how can we measure some tangible actions. So going from plans and going from frameworks through to actually what tangible actions are coming out and what impact is that making.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of freedom here. I'm typically a control person, but I'm going to give you freedom. So I'd like from each one of you a piece of wisdom for the audience. If you have one dream or one thing that you'd like people in the room to think of, what would you like to share? Who's volunteering to start? Lisa, go for it.
I'm going to continue to beat the same drum that I have already beat earlier, which is to recognize that perfection is not going to happen on day one, to be kind and forgiving and recognize that we really need to start somewhere and allow and encourage that quality to evolve over time in terms of reporting and then translating that reporting into behavioral change. So that would be my tip.
I would second that. I would say if you're an operating company, start little steps, but actually be ambitious. And that's the key, not just little steps going nowhere, but ambitious. And also in Quebec, we hear a lot from portfolio companies say, why do I need to measure my emissions? There is none. I use green power. Measure that there is none. actually get it certified and use that as a competitive advantage. I think we heard about this. It's very important because your clients are going to want to know. So do it.
I think if I may, I'll pick up on that point and add a build to it. So I would say ambition and also optimism. So certainly with the network that we've been creating, with the work that we've been doing across companies, we've really seen the role and the importance of being optimistic and realizing and remembering why we're all focusing on these really challenging topics. It can get really quite challenging sometimes trying to work through the detail. And I think having that optimism around the impact we're trying to have for climate change is really important.
I'm not sure it's wisdom. It's probably more prophecy, but I think in order to succeed in that transition, we're going to require a lot of renewable energy. And I think we've been blessed in Quebec with hydropower, and we believe there would be enough to a point that we've been selling it to other jurisdictions to some extent, but as of today, we're not having enough. And there's a lot of projects, in particular transition projects, that are not taking off right now because we do not have enough renewable power. So if I had one wish, it would be that governments really get into that, because at some point we're going to be facing an issue to either go somewhere else or to have a large debate about deregulating our markets. But right now, we're kind of hands-tied for many businesses in the situation we are, and it's going to be really challenging debates coming up. So keep an eye open for this discussion. It's going to be a tearing discussion.
Bertrand alluded to this also. We say in Quebec we need 50% more energy to electrify transport and buildings. We won't have the historical costs we had. And if we're simply sitting in Montreal, we know that 1 person out of 5 uses a food bank. Because between the housing costs, the energy costs, inflation, inequalities, it just doesn't add. So I think, Bertrand, what you were saying is civil society, government, and business, and NGOs probably, and First Nations will have to work together if we want to do the transition in a way that does not create more inequalities. The other way around, we have to do it in a way that reduces inequalities. On that basis, Lisa, you don't know that I'm going to ask you this
Yes,
question.
I
The standards, okay? Financial reporting standards, sustainability standards. There are discussions on why the heck do we have different standards for public sector? Why don't they have the same sustainability standards? Because one would think it's our money, investor money, pension fund money, it's taxpayers' money. That is clearly government is not investors, so risk-adjusted return is not what they should focus on. But if we used all the same measures for a small business, for the quality of the building, the emission of the building, all the sustainability metrics that are aligned to UN SDGs for the most part, we could probably streamline a lot of asks for business when it's relevant for risk-adjusted return and pay our taxes for government to deal with the rest. So where are we at? Do you know where we're at with the discussions on adopting similar sustainability standards for public sector? So we all measure the same. We all ask the same question. You don't need 3 reporting people because you report the same to everyone.
So there certainly would be a certain elegance to be able to apply the same, as you say, metrics or disclosure requirements across the board, right? So that we are, you mentioned, speaking the same language. If we look to climate disclosure, fortunately, in terms of the public sector, so crown corporations or federally regulated financial institutions, it's been mandated to disclose per TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which also happens to be the the starting point or the basis for the ISSB standards, IFRS, IFRS S1 and S2, the elements of TCFD are embedded there. So I think there is some good news on the climate front in terms of consistency. If we look to OSFI, if we look to the federal government, I believe or hope that there will be a search and replace for TCFD to be pointing to the standards that are established by the ISSB in the first instance, but I'm going to also promote and advertise here that the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board will be operational by end of June. The CSSB will be reviewing ISSB's final standards for adoption in Canada. And so across the board, we would like to see, as I say, that search and replace for TCFD and replace with the CSSB.
So that would be smart. I think in the US, what we see is, the SEC is proposing something and they're putting something in their supply chain requirements that's not exactly the same. So one would think they could have made it easier for everyone if we could align supply chain requirements for Scope 3 and disclosure requirements for investors. It's going to make everyone's life easier. So we have an opportunity, a real opportunity for simplification, cost reduction when it comes to sustainability by driving similar standards. So I think you kind of got a gist for the topic. Public sector finance will not be enough. Tax we pay will not be enough to drive this transition. We face climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, inequality crisis. We need private sector finance, public sector finance to align to the same goals. There's a lot of progress to move the needle locally, globally on sustainable finance. We will need to finance the transition, and we will need to work together to see how do we deal with the businesses and people most impacted. It's not an easy equation. There's going to be social unrest if we don't do it right. So we have a collective responsibility to move in the right direction, but be aware of the implications for businesses impacted and people impacted. That will require collaboration, coordination like never before. That's proven to be more challenging in federations, whether we look at Canada or EU or getting all levels of government and First Nations and everybody to align. We did that very well for COVID. We have an opportunity to do it again when it comes to sustainable finance. So partnerships at the industrial sector level, including scientific community, will be required. Public policies applied to various sectors will need refreshed industrial strategies. As Bertrand alluded to, measure it and show it that you're green. It's a competitive advantage. It helps you attract employees, helps you attract customers. So we'd be stupid not to do as in this country, in this province, if we're better than the others, eh? And to do it in a way that's understandable by investors and supply chain leaders. So I'd like you to join me to thank our panelists for their contribution, but also Finance Montréal for giving us the opportunity to come together, reflect together, move the needle together locally and globally. So thank you to all of you.